Alrighty, good evening. Happy Stores Day. It is Thursday in September. I don't remember which day of the month it is, but that's typical me. So, welcome to NycosRPG and to a particularly near and dear subject to my mind, the world in around 80 days. This is a project that I started some time ago and played with for a bit. I had a couple of potential game world building individuals who wanted to participate, but it hadn't worked out, and so we're kind of restarting this. And we are here in the archives looking at the possibility of putting together an adventure world in around 80 days of real time. So if you have ever thought of creating your own game world, if you've ever thought of creating your own story world for a narrative, a fictional book, or something like that you wanted to create, this is a great project for you. The mechanism will be utilizing some game mechanics, but that will often, in the cases of regular narrative, give an opportunity to come up with a variable or a random response in ways that you might not be able to simply by running it off the top of your head. So as we go through this, I hope we find something in there that'll be useful to you. I do want to mention that I'm Jonathan Alvin, a game master with 50 years of experience behind this screen in virtually every style of role-playing environment possible, starting with the granddaddy of them all, Dungeons and Dragons, when I was about 11 years old, and I've been running nonstop for 50 years since then. So I have a little bit of expertise that might be helpful to you, but more importantly, we've developed a process that actually makes it simple to put together every scene you want to put to your protagonists or to your player characters in the case of a game. So this will all be couched in the gaming mechanism because that is my root, but of course if there's any questions, feel free to ask them. If you like what you see, you can follow us here on Twitch, or you can actually join our Facebook group, or over at NycosRPG on Facebook. Or, of course, you could also become a supporting member through patreon.com/Nykos and kind of see where we're going with the entire project. But okay, we're going to get ready to get started, shall we? The difference between Nykos and the other systems that are out there is, quite frankly, it's fun, and I think we'll kind of support that going through this. Now, I'm going to be using a device, a page, if you will, for this process that I call the Community Identity Sheet, and this is available for you to download at NycosRPG.com. You go to the shop, and go to the community, the player character information, and there's a section for storytellers and Gamemaster support that includes the identity sheet. So it's a quick download, and I think you'll see how useful it is. And if I recall correctly, I do believe this version of the page is fillable, so you can actually put your numbers in and then save it in that fashion. So that's what we're going to be working with today. So let's go over to the workbook page, shall we? Alrighty. So NycosRPG, as I mentioned, is a simple to play, easy to pick up RPG mechanism. We're not going to be playing actually with the rules of Nykos, but we will be working with the numbering mechanism that's used. And we're going to be filling out this sheet with numbers for the most part. And as you will find, the numbers have graduated meanings, becoming more intense or of a higher gradient value depending on where you are on the spectrum. So each of these is therefore going to elicit a percentage number that we're going to be using as a checksum or a cap, depending on which section we're in, for what may or may not be available to the players in that section or that portion of town, or that portion of the adventure. So we're going to talk in particular about the sheet. I believe I've got it set up on, just a second, let me look here. Yes, okay, so we have it set up on the what is considered to be sort of the front page of this two-page document. Now, as you see, it's set up with the word downshift up there. I'm going to be changing that. It's actually just going to be the Nykos community identity sheet, and I believe it may be on the online, but I will endeavor to get that fixed here in a moment. But downshift is just one of the settings, and this tool is useful for any and all of them, as you will see. So, as a matter of fact, I'm pretty certain this is not the one that I recently did the updates to, because I did do the name change. Okay, doesn't matter. All right, so we're going to be working with this page. And when you're setting up a new game world or beginning a new story, there are several different ways to process that information. There are some persons that when they look at world building, they want to be able to see at a glance the entirety of the project. They want to know how to tell where the seedy underbelly of the community is and where the clear line to where the good guys would be, and elemental things like the major scenes of action. Will they be recurring, or are they singular in scenes? And if they are, how do we link them? And there's a lot of different pieces that we could pursue, but we're going to be looking at this mechanically as if we're looking at a specific locale for multiple scenes. By doing it in this fashion, by looking at it in a microscopic rather than a macroscopic scale, we're going to be able to isolate the terms more clearly and kind of focus them on this particular community that we're building. Now, if someone happens to hop on and wants to be a part of the process, feel free to just call out. I'll remind you from time to time. But if you are watching this live and have some ideas you'd like to have incorporated, feel free to leave comments. I tend to be responsive to those kind of things as we are doing the videos, so that we can make it feel more individually useful, and that everybody's a part of the process, so to speak. Fluid nutrition. Alrighty, so the first thing we're going to look at is the left column, the first 7 elements: affinity, agility, congeniality, empathy, productivity, stability, and tenacity. And this is going to be referring to the average person in the community, and of the community, therefore, as a whole. Generally, you'll use them in terms of what the community as a whole would do, but you could arguably choose to see whether an individual would be okay with a particular point. In fact, this is not my right sheet. It's bugging my brain right now. But affinity is mainly how in contact, in tune is this community. Are they very coherent? Do they know a lot about each other? Do they share things in common? Are they this is not really their affability. We'll get to that in a minute, and I realize this is completely the wrong sheet. Yay. So we will be working with an errant piece of data here. Just a second. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. There it is. I found the right one. Yay. So in this case, we're actually looking at the second half of the page here. And you see the terms are slightly different than the one I was just showing you. So we can now formally see if we can rename this one. No, we can't. We can just close it. Oop. Oop. All right. So, and this one needs to have its name renamed. That's really funny. But, so the terms on the left column of the second page, if you will, attributes, agility, congeniality, empathy, productivity, stability, and tenacity. There, that's the right mix and the right flow. Agility is the community's capability to react. How quickly would they respond to functions that happen in their community, to say a invasion by an enemy force or a delegate from a foreign nation? How rapidly would they be able to mount a response to that action or that visitation? Congeniality is literally how friendly, affable, how enjoyable, how much they like outsiders and newcomers. If they have a low congeniality, they're kind of not happy with foreigners and the like. If they have a high value, then they're expectant of the new people and want to engage with them. Then the third is empathy. Empathy is how much they actually would care if something was happening outside of their community, so that if you as an emissary from a foreign community came in, how this community would react to that call for assistance or whatever. And productivity has to do with how much they actually have for a work ethic. How willingly are they going to dump their efforts into something, particularly if it's been triggered by their agility? Are they quick to put shoulder to the plow, so to speak, or are they more reticent and less likely to make an effort? That's what the productivity is referring to, is the actual making of the effort. Stability is coherence, how much the community can hold together in difficult times. And then finally, tenacity is how long they will endure a tough situation. So a higher tenacity means that they will take the guff for longer. For example, a culture that has an external force placed on them periodically, forcing them to pay taxes, might have a relatively high tenacity, even if they are very slow to react, perhaps, and that tenacity kind of helps to hold them together in the face of that adversity. These attributes just give you a general feel for the community, and sometimes you'll build this portion because that's what you want to build, and then other times it's what you're going to need to be able to pull this together relatively early in the process to get an idea of what you need to convey to the players as they come into the community. So just realize that this document, the master book identity sheet, is fundamentally the equivalent of a player character's sheet, and the more information you have on this, the more information the players will be able to interact with in terms of understanding what it is they want to get to. So the location attributes have to do with a separate facet, and that one we're going to cover next. The locational attributes are referring to how this community responds and what defines the values and the ideology of this community. And so before it was talking about the general community and how quickly they can respond and things like that, but it doesn't really say what they hold valuable. This case, the locational attributes will show us what they hold valuable and to what degree they're willing to support or hold to those particular points. Aesthetic appeal is referring to what does the town look like? Do they have great, beautiful vistas? Do they work to keep the area picked up and free of debris? Are they concerned with what others outside of their community perceive of them? Are they concerned with what kind of an outward image that they present? These are all parts of aesthetic appeal, and the higher the aesthetic appeal, the more that number refers to how dedicated they are to maintaining that. So if it's a fairly high number, it means they don't want to be seen in a negative light. So that does give a potential pressure point for the players to be able to guide the community in the direction they want to go. Things like that. Cultural isolation, that has to do with how much this community depends on itself and no one else. The more isolated they are, the more quirky their tendencies might be, the more abstract their hold on the overall culture might be, and so on. And so having an awareness of the community's cultural isolation and how much they hold to keeping it that way. Again, the higher numbers suggestive of prizing it highly and dedicating effort to maintaining it. That desire for cultural isolation generally is a kind of a good indicator of how stratified the community is and how much they're working together. The more they work together, the more isolated they might become, because as they come to places where they would diverge, if they were trying to hold the community together, they would be less culturally isolated and more willing to embrace other thoughts. So just realize that these numbers bounce off of each other and feed off each other so that you can kind of create the specific balance you want for this community. The third of the locational attributes, of course, is material wealth, and this is referring to how much they've gathered, what they have in terms of resource that might be tradable. For example, if they've got a great fishing community, if they've got several mines in operation, several different kinds of resources being gathered, all of these things would lend themselves towards having a desire to maintain material wealth, and therefore feed the dedication to maintaining that and not wanting to risk it. So the numbers give you a really good picture on what's going on with that community. Another potential hot point, if you will, in location attributes is their dedication to self-sufficiency. If they are looking for the means to put a particular task in effect, the fact that they can depend on each other and are aware that each person in the community will hold to their particular task and are self-sufficient independently, so no one has to watch over each other, that lends itself to a tighter community. Now it could also lean more towards the cultural isolation, but it doesn't necessarily have to, because you can pride yourself on being self-sufficient and still be sort of a team player and want to expand the community as a whole in wider ways. So self-sufficiency more is determining how much of a work ethic each individual in the community might have. Pardon me. Sophistication, I think, is a fun one. The more sophisticated a community is, the arguably less isolationist they can be, because they're trying to become more interconnected. Sophistication has to do with more detail, more awareness, more knowledge, more communication. And all of these things lend themselves to a good counterbalance to the other issues that might come up based on your attributes. And then finally, trade relevance is how much of what they have to offer is really desired by people outside of this community that would allow for interchange of commerce and therefore trade, and how important they feel being able to trade is. So if they are isolationist and they don't have a high trade relevance, they don't care about the outsiders. They don't care about people they might trade with. Otherwise, that's not what their focus is. So by looking at each of these in the light of the others, you kind of can get a feel for how the community works. Now, when we get done with this first hour or so, we'll come back and put in some numbers and see how they might work together and how they might clash, and what those differences might mean. But I just kind of want to make sure I get over the entire form before we get to that. The next would be the relevant details, and these are generally posted as terms, but they are stratified. So if you wanted to, you could roll dice for these numbers and then plug in the appropriate terminology. There will be a cheat sheet available to go with the master book CID here, or CIS, so that you can quickly convert, say, a village to 30% on the chart, or roll 30% and know that's a village, that kind of thing. Relative position, low value, means that it's very far from other communities and difficult to get to. Really high relative position means that it's got to be fundamentally on a crossroads, which will therefore modify or alter the means of access, which generally is the types of conveyance or travel that can bring you to this location. But that may also mean that it requires, for example, magic to get here, and those kind of access limitations could be in place even if it has relatively localized positioning. If you think, for example, of Diagon Alley in the Harry Potter series, that place is absolutely accessible to people who are in the know, but the awareness of how to access it is very tightly controlled. And in same fashion here, you might have a very public relative position and a very low number of means to access. Population density, numeric percentage, determines not necessarily how many people are per capita in an area, but instead you're looking at how many people per square foot within a community. So therefore, if you have a high density, you could actually have that high density in a rural place, meaning that the families that are on the property are extended families and such like, and therefore your population density is only a relatively comparative term. Social integration is a reference to how much the community knows about each other. Generally, with a lower population, you have ironically higher social integration because they have to depend on each other so much. But that flip-flops as you gain in population, and it flip-flops again as you get to ultra high population density, and so social integration becomes a gauge for where we are in that community development. And then finally, aggression, a determinant of how reactionary this community is to actions that have occurred from the outside. If somebody makes a threat, these guys may want to respond with a counter response, or they may want to go to war. So the percentage die roll for aggression determines what that reaction response might be. We're going to switch to the other page again for the next couple, and we'll come back to the story details and personalities. But the next thing we're going to want to look at is community distribution. Now this one is set up for, it's actually ironically set up for downshift, and these terms apply to the downshift world, but they have analogs in all of the other realms. So a person who is a person of books is a person who is scholarly, a person who spends material time in research, scientific knowledge, that kind of thing. Dealers are your negotiators and know the ins and outs of trade. They generally also know the ins and outs of politics. And so although the dealers and speakers sometimes are seen on the same stage, the dealers are those that are trying to gain a decision or a conviction or a response from the community, whereas a speaker is a presenter of details and perhaps a negotiator of peace. Scrounges are your collectors. They're those individuals that you can go to in any culture to find the essential items you may not have been able to find otherwise. By having a specific percentage of your community that are dedicated to these different facets, you can see how well they are running, for example, recycling programs, or how much of the time is spent listening to each other compared to shouting at each other. Speakers, as I said, are generally those who are well versed in words, but it could be poets, priests, and politicians. So it could be musicians, it could be singers. Speakers is just a general term for public presentation. Splicers are the people who get stuff done. They could be called, in certain other cultures, they might be called greasers. They might be called hacks. They could be running speakeasies. The idea is that they are the social engineering viscous fluid, so to speak. They are the grease, the oil that keeps things going, and may or may not have specialized skills as well. And then finally, wrenches in this case is referring to the concept of the makers, the creators, the builders, those that cause a device or a series of devices to function. We'll get more into these when I've corrected the sheet in the next one of these presentations I do. All right, next is cultural diversity, and I have not listed any, but the concept of cultural diversity is that the societies in the NycosRPG mechanism are influenced by the ways in which people live. So if your people live in a commune and are involved in the creative arts and interpretive dance and things like that, you will have a cultural influence from that background. So you would list here that you have the communes and they have a certain percentage of impact on the local scene. You might have a merchant's guild or a series of merchants' guilds, and therefore be influenced by the material world, perhaps in a more skewed way. Or maybe you have a university, an educational fortress that allows people to study and learn without provocation. Each one of these methodologies for having a culture will cause diversions and alterations within the community's response to things, and so we can see how that works. We do have the economic balance in terms of percentage, upper class, middle class, lower class. This isn't going to add up to 100%. It's not a division of them, but rather saying what influence that portion of the culture has. For example, if you take the timeline of the movie Newsies, the influence starts off with the upper classes having the primary balance influence, but there's an influx and an improvement in the impact of the lower classes, such that by the end of the film, spoiler I suppose, the Newsies win their strike and the price of the newspapers goes back to that which is more manageable for them. And then from then on, they've got a more even representation in their community. The next section here on occupations and trades is a reference to what specialties this community has. If we've determined that they are isolated, that they are culturally isolated, they're also socially disconnected, and mechanically it's very difficult to get resources out of here, then perhaps their occupations and trades will be more specific to the local needs. Or conversely, if they are a big exporter, you might have 3 or 4 occupations and trades here that don't even really apply to the local populace. And so having this occupations and trades section allows you to customize that particular setting or location to suit those purposes. The next part, going back to the first page, bottom corner of the first page, and I went through these sort of the way I did because it's sort of the way my mind works, but I didn't want to represent it on a page, so I didn't want to influence other people. Story details are literally the scenes within the setting that this page defines that you perceive of there being interactions. So, for example, if this is a village, then you're going to have the town hall and maybe the guild council building and maybe a faith community and maybe an artist enclave. You'll be able to just tack those in, and they won't necessarily have a percentage associated with them, but they could if you were looking for having a random encounter in the community where that would happen. Then you would use a percentage mechanism for that, where it's most likely to least likely. The final section on the page, therefore, the personalities, and this really comes from the nature of gameplay when the player is engaging in the scene. They are going to create affinity with certain personas, which it's best for you to recognize and associate that, and then amplify that by providing more information on those recurring personalities. And so by having the lines here, you have a place to tap down the names. Perhaps you'll build a persona sheet to go with them, the entire profile, so that they are completely fleshed out. Maybe you'll only have a couple of numbers because you only perceive them as being window dressing. The point being is that the sections, therefore, are supporting the purpose, which is to create a community. Now, how does this fit into around the world in around 80 days? Well, if we look at your first setting, the setting could be as large as your planet. It could be as big as the valley all of your adventures are going to occur in. They could be as large as the world, in which case these numbers are going to be focusing on the world as a whole. Now, it doesn't seem like that would be very helpful, but having these as the threshold templates, then you have the ability with your next level of development, sliding downscale into the world, utilizing one of these story points, or maybe building an entire culture based on one of these attributes. This mechanism, the identity sheet, really just gives you the bouncing point for what you want to do next in your development process. My recommendation is for this to be a specific location. And for example, when you were talking about the story details, you would actually list what is north of the city, or what is north of your location, what is south of your location, east, west, perhaps above and below. And by having those potential locational triggers, then you can either drill down into one of them, or arguably, if it's the reverse, expand up by leaving the map and then now expanding what's north of north, so to speak. So just realize that although this blank sheet doesn't seem like much of a thing other than a brightly colored piece of graphic, it actually is a instrumental tool for building the rest of the adventures you want to create. So now that we've done that, I'd like to take a few minutes and go over a master sheet here and actually attribute some numbers so that you might be able to see how this might work out. Let's see whether or not I can actually engage with it. I may not be able to because I don't know if we've got it set up for it or not. No. So let me do this. Let's see if I can get to the non-PDF version. No, that's only going to take me to PDF, so I'm going to have to go the other direction. It's at the half an hour mark, a little bit after anyway. You probably just had to put through a commercial, so I apologize for that. I'm going to take a few moments and correct my screen for our purposes so that we can actually do the next part. So please hang on, and we will be right back.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame. Our strength in numbers is is a roll of the dice. Played 1,000 hours, and I think that I died just once, or maybe twice. I live in dungeons, dungeons, always did. I live in dungeons, dungeons, like a kid. I'm well respected as a lord of the blade. Got a dozen guildmates, always up for a late night raid. Though I wouldn't know them by a name or a face. We fight like brothers in a war with the dark elf race. In a dying age, I live in dungeons, dungeons, always did. I live in dungeons, dungeons, like a kid. Dungeons, dungeons, caves and halls. I live in dungeons, dungeons, pits and falls. So now you know why I'm glued to my chair, and what you call real life just doesn't compare. I bear no grudges. I live in dungeons. I live in dungeons. Dungeons. Always did. I live in dungeons. Dungeons. Like a kid. Dungeons, dungeons, always did. I live in dungeons, dungeons, like a kid. Dungeons, dungeons, caves and halls. I live in dungeons, dungeons, pits and falls.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Haha. I think I got it figured out though. So give me 2 seconds to reconnect here. Here we go. Yikes, too big. Make it smaller. Alrighty. So, what we're going to be now looking at is actually putting the numbers into a page, and so seeing what those numbers will be. We could use a random number generator, but I'm going to just plug in numbers, and that way when we come back we can adjust them. I actually don't know what the name of this community is going to be, so I'm not going to worry about naming it yet. But the first thing that I do when I'm going to be doing a bit of world building in a specific location is I will actually start in the center of town and build out information about the region. And this is important to kind of help narrow or drill down your focus to keep you from sliding up and down scales. One of the biggest challenges to being a world creator is to know when enough's enough and when what you're building is being creative, or if you're just stuffing words onto a page. And so when we are looking at any community, I try to think of it from the standpoint of the city center news post. As you may know, the central post in any given community was how they determined where information came from, because they would mark the post with the flyer or the notice on whichever side from which they had traveled. So it's kind of like the understanding of the winds. If somebody says it's a westerly wind, they mean it's a wind coming from the west. In this case, if you're going to be talking about what's happening on the north side of the city, you would put a marker, a note on the north side of the post. As a matter of fact, our word news actually derives from north, east, west, south. You may or may not have known that. If you knew it already, I sound like I'm being patronizing, and if you didn't, I sound like I'm a genius. So I'm okay either way. You can pick on me. Hey, Echo, welcome. Where's my bell? Welcome. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in. Be glad to answer them. We are talking about the community identity sheet, which is downloadable right now from NycosRPG.com. You can go there and I believe it's under character sheets or under player support. Either which way, the CIS is a free to use download, and it does not currently have this third page. This is a new edition that I just added to it, so it'll be updated by tomorrow. But right now it's a 2-page document, which the other 2 pages look somewhat like these. Now these are marked downshift, and I haven't updated them yet because they will be used for virtually all NycosRPG sessions for you to build locations. But since we are building this one in the very core basic, let's see if I can get it to let me do the update. No, it probably won't. Let's see, maybe it will. Yes, it will. There we go. Fix that. And it fixed all of them. All right. Good. So the stage 1, therefore, of building your community is to think about what is its center, and then from what is its center, what is it the center of? In other words, when I lived in western Kansas when I was a little kid, I learned pretty quickly that if I was in the town of Quinter, then if I went south of Quinter on any main road, I would eventually end out in a little town called Gove. And if I took that same idea and went generally north, I would find myself in, I think, Plainsville was the closest. I mean, I'm probably going to get them wrong because it's only been 30, 40 years since I was there. But I also knew that if you went east, you were headed for Hayes, and if you were headed west, you were headed for Oakley. And that was pretty much the way you defined where you were in the world is by what was around you. So in this case, for example, I would say on the north side is Plainville. Ooh, man, it's too dark of a font. That's okay. See if I can get that to zoom out a bit more. Do. Okay, well that's way too close, but okay. So north side is Plainville, east is Hayes. South would be Gove. West would be Oakley. Now, in the case of a place like Hayes, there really isn't an underside. The town's so small, it's like 3,500 citizens all told. So it really isn't an underside, but there's a joke, and so I'm going to put the joke in here. You see, when I was about 5 years old, we had been living in a metropolis in comparison. We'd been in and around the Chicago area. We lived in Waukegan, and we lived in Lake Villa and a couple of other places. But the emphasis was on the fact that we were in a city and we understood, sophisticated things. Remember that ability of sophistication. But in this case, we had been familiar with that, and I came back east and back out west, and we went to live in Quinter. And as I walked down the main street of town, there I saw a staircase from the front of a building leading downstairs. I had no idea that back in that part of the world they had basements that were accessible from the alley, and they had a front access with a staircase just as a secondary route into that area. It was basically the back door to their basement. I didn't know that, and so therefore I commented to my dad that I was really glad to see that Quinter was ahead of the time by having built a subway. So that's particularly funny because, of course, the basements in the town of Quinter, if they had them, were not connected. There was no underground railway. They didn't have a population that could have supported it anyway. So, hey, I'm going to make a pun. Hey, Echo, I'm saying hi again. I know I said hi a minute ago, but now I've said it again because of Echo. Okay. Anyway, on the other hand, the countryside of the area around Quinter is quite fascinating because not only does it have a large ranching and farming community, it also has the Smoky Hill River has sandstone bluffs. They're about 25 miles south of town, so you're not right in the community. But what's interesting about the sandstone bluffs in that part of the world is that it looks like, and for all practical purposes is like, a mini Grand Canyon. It's where the river has cut its way into the hills, and the sandstone, which is only slightly tougher than sand and dirt, allowed itself to be cut out in the same kind of rugged pattern, so that literally you could play hide and go seek in those those canyons and those pathways and such. And so the fact that I'm building a real location means I can pull on what I know of that real location. If we were doing a fictional setting, perhaps I might put in a lot more detail about what's to the west. Perhaps that's where the wild ones are, and perhaps to the north are peaceful tribes, and maybe to the east there's a trading post. Whatever you want to put in here are those things. And the external box here would be so that you could, if you chose to make these into random encounters, you could assign numeric values to them to determine what the likelihood of meeting somebody from that locale or that species or whatever, and therefore give you an opportunity to create your scaling for the adventure. But this is just ultimately this is just the frame. I just wanted to build out where this town of Quinter is. So once we've determined that, then we can now go down to the page. The attributes we talked about first, and let's look into those now. Quinter has a cattle sales barn and a co-op. Fundamentally, a co-op is similar to like a Granger store where they do trade and support each other. It's almost like a farmer's guild, and that actually might play into this as well. So from an aesthetics appeal, the Sandstone Bluffs is arguably one of the most beautiful things that's visible, but it's 25 miles south of town, and a practical working community like this doesn't really focus a lot on aesthetic appeal. So I'm going to put that here as 30. That just means that there are a few folks that are looking forward to creating a much more pleasing appearance to the community, but they just don't have it yet. Cultural resilience. Well, the people of Quinter had been pioneers in the 1850s to the 1890s, and they were, for the majority of them, were actually on the Butterfield Trail, which passed right through this particular area of Kansas, and therefore they were very proud of their Germanic culture. Quinter, meaning the fifth, was a name that was attributed to the local area, not to a family member, although I did find that there were other Quinters in other states. This one seems to, its name had more, I think, to do with the, if I recall correctly, the postmaster general of the city's name was Quinter. They actually didn't have a name for it. It was a stop on the railroad when the railroads were first being built, and it had been a stop on the Butterfield Trail. It had really good water and such like, but as far as their cultural resilience, I'm going to set it at 60 because they're pretty consistent and dependable folk. Now, their wealth building mechanism, the things that drew revenue to them, were not natural resources they dug out of the ground. Kansas isn't known for being a place where there's a lot of mining. Yes, later they found oil, and there is some of that, but the material wealth of individuals in the Kansas area came from farming and ranching, and in particular ranching, because they were a cutoff point for moving your cattle from the ranges of the south in Texas, where your young cattle would be driven north. Then they would be brought to the fattening up lands of Kansas and Nebraska. They would be fattened up, and then they'd be sent to processing centers further east. So the idea of material wealth, it was a slow build, and I'm only going to set it at 45. In other words, most of the people that worked in Quinter were not there to make money. That was not what was important to them. And while they did respect those that had it, they were not those that might bend the knee or show deference. Kansas was, after all, a free state in the days after their ratification right at the beginning of the Civil War, and therefore they were a free state, and therefore they were not concerned with the grinding out of wealth on the backs of others or things like that. Therefore, that does lend itself to the next one. In self-sufficiency, hands down. My grandfather, my great grandfather, so my dad's great grandfather, no, my dad's grandfather had 8 sons, and he himself had been relatively wealthy because when he had come out at first, he had been able to, with his large family, appoint a large section between Gove and Quinter, and Gove being the county seat at the time, Gove and Quinter, and solidified a really large land holding, which he then divided 8 ways and gave each of his sons a chunk of land of equivalent size. And while there were some variances and arguments came up about whether this brother or that brother got the better lay of the land, the point was is they were all absolutely self-sufficient and could take care of themselves, to the point that Granddad Alvin basically pitted them against each other in a good-natured but malicious fraternal conflict that lasted the majority of their lives. Some of them went to their graves with rather some bad juju, including stealing other men's wives and stuff. It's a fascinating history, but what it does come down to is the self-sufficiency. That's going to be pretty high, so I'm going to set it at 75. Next is sophistication, and sophistication means technology and means progressiveness and awareness of what is up and coming. And while it doesn't really seem like it, I should mention that the community there in Quinter was predominantly Mennonite. They had actually moved west with the early separatists who moved away from the what they called the Old Order. And while some of the members of the community remained in that Old Order faith, meaning they didn't want to use technology, didn't want to acknowledge trucks and combines and all that kind of thing, nonetheless, they were also very pragmatic people. And so their sophistication I'm going to set at 30. I better make it 45, because the ones who did become wealthy used all of the amenities. And but I can tell you, it was really funny. I went to one of my family reunions some years back, and what I found really fascinating was that one of my dad's cousins was active in the Mennonite community and was indeed bordering on the Old Order, in that he had the flat hat and the jacket with no buttons and all of those, even shaving his beard to only, shaving the cheeks of his beard so that only the neck beard was visible. But the suits that he wore were made by Dolce and Gabbana and Versace. And so he was spending really high dollars for really beautiful suits. I never even knew that those kind of companies would do that, but it makes sense. There's money to be had. Those guys are extremely wealthy because all they do is farm and they have no place else to spend it, so to speak. So their sophistication, ironically, even the Old Order there in Quinter relented and allowed them to have, for example, air conditioning in their tractors and full-on stereo systems. I remember going out to visit Ross one time a long time ago. I must have been only 8 or 9, but I remember "We Will Rock You" banging out of the cab of that tractor as it rolled up to where we were. It was like surreal. And finally, trade relevance. Well, Quinter itself was on the ATSF railway, Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe railways when they from product from from St. Louis, Missouri, straight out to Denver and to points south through Atchison and all of that. So the train routes were really, really a big thing, and moving your cattle and moving your grain to places where it could sell was absolutely necessary. And so I'm going to set trade relevance for this community at 90. It really is important to them that they're able to move that. And so anybody who was going to get in the way of their business was going to have trouble. Now, if you think to the American West, this town in Quinter's, in my head, starting to form up as a basis for a Wild West adventure, because I'm now recalling that one of the biggest challenges was that the herds of cattle coming north out of Texas, and it would be on their way to, either they'd be headed clear up to Cheyenne or even into Montana to winter the cattle, or they were going to be staged right here in the local area to be fattened up and then put on train cars headed for Chicago and other places where there was butchery going on. Lincoln, Nebraska was another. But the point is that this trade relevance point is right, making me realize that we've got something we can hang a story on right here. If we go with the trade relevance of 90, we're pretty much guaranteeing that something along the lines of interaction with the trade angle is going to come up. All right. So next, let's go to, let's see, I'm making sure I got this on the screen. I think I just moved it. Eek. Eeks. I did move it. Didn't need to. My apologies. All right. So let's go ahead and move directly to the relevant details since we're right here anyway. Location town type is town, and town is set at either 30 on the low side or 45 on the high side, so I'm going to use 45. It generally means about usual or average size. And I'll mark it as a town. It's not by any stretch a city, neither is it a hamlet or village. It's definitely distinctly a town. Relative position is going to be also about a 45 because the nearest other towns include, as I said, Oakley and Hayes, and both of those are fundamentally a horse. A full day travel would get you to either of them, or by car, of course, you can get there in a matter of half an hour to an hour. I think it's an hour to Oakley, but so just going to leave it at 45. It generally means it's close. I'll go ahead and put that in. Moderately close. Connectivity is going to be way up there because we have the railroad and the first of the major thoroughfares, Old 40, Highway 40, when it rides right through these areas, and Highway 40 pretty much traced the railroad's course from one coast to the other. So connectivity was really high. So again, I'm going to put it at 90. Very connected. Population density. It's a rural setting for the most part. It's a town, but it's rural in nature. They did have relatively large families, though, and that had more to do with the convenience of having a workforce in your home. And so when we are talking about population density, in this case, I'm going to put it at 30. And you'll notice I'm putting these in increments of 15, and that has everything to do with what I utilize as a general scale for things in Nycos. When we talk about magic and things like that, or technology, I'll use the phrase more often, but the phrase spectaculatum is a mnemonic means of tracking the different tiers of the amount of material. So whether it be population density or possibility of finding gold in ore, those numbers will follow that spectaculatum scale with higher density, higher value. So a spec is less than 15, a ton is 90. Spectaculatum, you'll see how that works in a while. But anyway, population density of 30 is a little bit less than average for the time period, but is also relatively high for the local area, because if we were any more rural, then you would literally only have a density of 10 to 15, because your people wouldn't be making families, wouldn't be having homes and bunching up like that. Social interaction. Because of social integration in a village that supports trade to other cities, I'm going to set the social integration relatively high at 60. That's mainly because, in addition to the faith community I've already talked about in the Mennonite faith and the Old Order, that being two potential churches, you also have the Catholic Church, which was also expanding westward at the time, as were the Presbyterians and Episcopalians, and those altered. They weren't always both in the same city, and sometimes you'd even find Methodists. But for the most part, it was your independent churches like the Churches of Christ, and then the Mennonite communities, which called themselves Houses of the Brethren, and then you'd have the Old Order, which just called itself the Old Order, and then the bigger, more organized churches came later. Finally, aggression. The community of Quinter has a relatively low aggression because they are so self-sufficient and also sophisticated that they're not going to be raising themselves to aggression. But internally, there is still a considerable amount of communication difficulties within these communities because of the faith communities and other reasons. For example, my own grandfather was a conscientious objector to World War II. He didn't want to go. He didn't. His father, Marvin was one of the younger brothers, and so he was not required to go. And he was not as gung-ho as his older brothers, and so he didn't. And because he didn't go, several of the young men in the town decided on a weekend, I'm sure it had something to do with alcohol and such like, decided to come out to the Albin farm. And when they got there, they painted all of his tractors yellow. And this was in the 1940s, during the war. And it was a big thing, but it never made the papers, so to speak. It never was brought up in any public way. But my grandfather bore the indignity of that for the rest of his life. As a matter of fact, he spent his later years actually buying, renovating, repairing, and selling tractors, making sure that there weren't any yellow parts on them when he got done. I mean, that wasn't what he was really doing. He was actually just in that trade. But his affinity for tractors, I think, was tied to the rough justice they kind of placed on him. All right, so now we're going to move this up here a bit and talk about story details and personalities. Now, I'm going to be only using individuals I know for this now that we're setting it in the American West in the uh, early days of this town of Quinter. So I'm only going to put down the things that I know that the community had as possible story detail settings. First of all, there was a railway station. Really wasn't much of one. It was a single story, almost basically the size of a double wide trailer nowadays, that was set against the railway tracks right next to the water tank that they used to refill the water on those old steam engines. So there was a railway station. There would have been the auction barn, because folks that brought the cattle north, sometimes they would have to parse their herd. Either they'd had a rough ride up north and therefore some of the cattle had lost too much weight and needed to be summered someplace, more than likely right here locally, or they would be sold onto wagons heading west to take them out to the rangeland where they could recover before being brought back. So it was a way of like getting a second bite at the apple with your younger cattle, your yearlings and such. So an auction barn was an essential part of the community to be able to move those cattle around, and it served other purposes as well. They used it for potlucks and that kind of thing. Next thing that you would have would be a general store. And if I recall correctly, I think there were actually two in the area of Quinter. Not because they had a high population, but because they were so close to the county seat. Gove County being this entire region, they actually built the county seat in the center of the region, and so therefore literally it was way out in the boonies. Therefore, people that were coming into the community and going to be working with county would want to be able to purchase items and get the stuff to set up house or whatever. And so the general stores in town were either affiliated with the railroad or they weren't. And yeah, there were conflicts. As a matter of fact, some of the most dynamic stories of the American West took place in little towns like Quinter, and the actual conflict between the owners of the general stores often ended up being nuisance stories for everyone else in the community. If you've watched any of the old series Little House on the Prairie, the Laura Ingalls Wilder's stories were just rife with that kind of local political drama. Next thing that there was, I'm trying to remember what they called it. There was, I think it was called a tap room. It couldn't formally be a saloon, because at that point in time, Kansas was what they called a blue state. The laws wouldn't allow you to be in flagrante delicti. You couldn't be drunk and disorderly. You couldn't be drunk in public. You couldn't actually buy a drink across the counter, because the teetotalers movement was already pretty strong in the area. But there was a tap room, so yes, you could buy your alcoholic product and you could test it in a tap room, and that place acted as, if you will, the local bar without actually formally being that. They had bankers' hours for the most part. They had to close down by dark. Everybody had to be gone from that area, and it was pretty strictly enforced because of the influence of the old orders and stuff like that. But this is for, and there would also be a hotel. I believe it was called the Grand, and it was downtown, and it was one of the few buildings that was more than one story tall, and it was, you got all the fancy stuff you could, because if a dignitary or somebody was traveling on the train and had to spend an afternoon rewatering the tank or whatever mechanical problem might have occurred. You wanted to make sure you could provide the best of services, therefore to draw the largest amount of money from them. So let's go with the Grand Hotel. Now, notice I could put numbers on these 1 through 6, or I could put percentage numbers on it. Either way, it could be a way of determining where an encounter occurs or whatever, but I'm just generally writing them down now. And I'm not going to do any of the personalities at this point because they probably, the only ones I can remember would be relatives, and I don't want to tell them myself any more than I already have. So now let's go look at the actual meat and potatoes of the identity sheet. These are the numbers that will be the working numbers when you are resolving a conditional situation in a game setting. So, for example, they've come to town. Your adventurers have come to town, and they are looking for some gold miners. Maybe they want to find a clergyman or maybe a physician to travel with them, and maybe they want to add somebody who speaks one of the local native tribe languages. Well, by having a community distribution value here, and these, I'm putting it as totally arbitrary. The idea is that if you needed to find somebody of that occupational path, someone from that way, you could theoretically find them by rolling against their likelihood of being there. And just like in any other rolling mechanism within an ecosystem, a partial success would mean somebody who does this job and something else. So you might find somebody who is a searcher, but when you rolled a 60. And therefore, that person is a searcher, but they probably also have another job, so then you would just roll for another of the possible jobs. In this case, tanks are not the military kind of tanks, but they would be the hard workers, the farm hands, and the like. And so I'm going to set that at 65. And then finally, tinkers. In about any culture, you'd have to have at least somebody who could work on something. So I'm going to set that at 55. Therefore, you're more than likely to find somebody that does the things you're looking for when they came into this town. These numbers also would be the caps at which they could do the particular tasks. So if you had them wanted them to translate a passage of Algonquin or whatever, they would roll against their talker's skill and compare that with the language to see whether they know it. And of course, the more specialized that persona is, they actually become an RP in the game, a recurring personality, and then they get added to your personalities list on the other page. So that's mechanically how that kind of works. Now, we do need to figure out what's really important to this town in terms of the town's makeup. First of all, the affinity in the town is really high. They really get along pretty well, and they talk to each other a lot. Their agility is, though, pretty slim because they don't take to outsiders much, and they don't really want to get involved in. This is, remember, the period right at the ending of the Civil War, and the Kansans were not known for wanting to just jump out and join up with either side in the conflict. As far as geniality, they are extremely such, so I will set that at 50. Their empathy, they are saps for sad stories. I mean, my own grandfather's property south of Quinter that I've described down by the river, by the sandstone bluffs I was talking about, their little house was built into the hillside. It was literally a dugout, and it caught fire, and I believe it was my great grandmother passed away in the fire, and people came from all up and down the valley to help and to offer condolences and try to get my grandfather to move. The irony is that my great-grandfather, before the fire, had pretty much lost all of his motor nerve functions. He wasn't walking, he wasn't doing a lot of stuff. But after his spouse died and he had to step up and take care of his own boys, he fundamentally revived. He was literally what they thought was on his deathbed, and then he resurged, and I actually got to go to his 95th birthday in Quinter when I was a little boy. So that was pretty cool that he had come out of his doldrums because of the tragedy that befell his family and what he did to tighten his belt and get them all back up and running. Their empathy, however, is a little cold. I'm going to set that a little bit lower at 30. They are willing to help you for a bit, but they do not hold out hope that you're going to be changed. They're not, although their faith community was, in theory, evangelistic. Their communion was a closed communion, which meant that if you were not a member of their actual body of brethren, you were not provided things like communion. You were simply out because you were not in. And so it took a while to get them to open up to you, and therefore their empathy wasn't exactly the best. However, their productivity really was off the charts. They would give you the shirt off their back, and they would work 4 hours after sunset to get work done. My grandfather's solution to everything was, if things get bad, just go back to work. Just get at it. Just go to work. For all these reasons, their stability is one of the best in that area, in my estimation, and their stick-to-itiveness is a credit to the families that are there. So I'm also say they're fairly high. All right. As far as cultural diversity, I've talked about the groups. We've got the Old Order. We have the Brethren. And believe it or not, the other culture that they've got going on here is the co-op. Co-op was a nonprofit corporation, but their purpose was to support the workers in the field to make sure that they got their fair square. So they were acting in a way sort of like a regulatory service, but it was community driven, and so they worked always with each other, and so therefore it was a cultural thing. Arguably, we could add more. We could add the 4-H. We could add the sports teams of the schools as we get later in life. But since we are talking about the early days of the town, let's just stick with these. Of course, the economic balance really is not there. There's really not much in terms of classes, but there was a lot of economic stratification. But there was almost no poverty, really. If you were in that area, you had relatives. You had others that would support and help you. So you never were completely out on your ear. Occupations and trades. Now, this is the area where we'd have to dial down to which year we're talking about, whether there was a particular card sharp that might be in the area that was visiting the tap rooms and getting people to play cards. There were a lot of other potential jobs that might fit here. One of most interesting note here is the job of a railway inspector. And my grandmother's father, so my father's maternal grandfather was a railway inspector. And what's fascinating is that his life wouldn't be too different from the lives of people today, because in his realm and in his world, he literally had different women in different cities that he traveled the railway to visit. Now his primary wife, was here in Quinter, or the environs of Quinter, not exactly sure specifically. But I always knew her name as Jenny. She was not his first wife, but she was the if I recall correctly, the one that was in the story. Anyway, every time he would get ready to start his run down the railroad and was going to be gone for a couple of months on his inspections, she would do everything she could to put him in his nicest suit, make sure it was pressed, that it was smelled good, made sure he had cologne, that he'd shaven, that he was dolled out to the nines, because she knew that he knew she was a number one, and no matter what, he was coming back here. A resourceful woman for the time. She had no hold on him. he could have simply done whatever he was going to do, because the culture wouldn't have prevented it. But that was Grandpa Rash, Grandpa Charlie, and Grandpa Charlie was an amazing individual. His greatest claim to fame was that he could cut a fine rug, is the way he would say it, meaning he was a dancer. He would go into the local communities and sweep young women off their feet and go back to their place and whatever, and then he'd be gone on the railway to the next train location. So that was Grandpa Charlie, Grandpa Rash, and fascinating stories about him. And he ironically lived at the very end of this period I'm talking about, because although he was not in the Civil War, he had a considerable amount of Civil War memorabilia that he'd been able to trade from the hobos and tramps that utilized the trains after the war and on into the 20th century. So fascinating stuff. Alrighty, so have we completed the page? Let me go look at it, make sure that we haven't missed anything. No, we got everything but the personalities. So now, with that information, you can look back at our directional stuff and you can see where the adventures might go. For example, you might decide, we're going to follow Charlie Rash's activity, and his train going east is going to take him to Hayes. What's beyond Hayes? What is Hayes? Where is it? What kind of town is it? Now, these are all things that you're going to want to build and expand. So your day one, you've already built a framework that incites the discovery of what's beyond. And that's really the key to building a world in around 80 days, is that by building the core world in as concise a method as possible, you give it scaling opportunities to expand fundamentally, infinitely, because eventually you get to every town on the railroad, and then what's beyond that railroad, and what connects to that railroad, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we will carry more on this in our next episode. We have been at it for an hour and a half. My mouth is dry, and I think I pretty much covered the CIS and how it can be used and how best you can utilize it for your own campaigns. If you have if you have questions or concerns about the system, would like to know more, I'm on the air 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday. And then we also have, if you're interested in becoming part of our community, our Patreon site, patreon.com/Nykos, has the steps and ways to become a citizen in the world of Nykos, and thereby be eligible to participate in our live stream games that we play on the weekends, Saturdays at 9 a.m. and Sundays at 1 p.m. Both of those are Pacific times. But we also have events that go on at our game stores in Redlands, California, Board Game Paradise. And for more information about that, check out BoardGameParadise.com, or their Facebook page is at Board Game Paradise. that will give you access to the Discord for them, and therefore be able to connect up with the sessions that I run there on Mondays and Tuesdays. Finally, beyond those, I do have this channel to thank. So if you are watching on Twitch, please follow us so that we can keep you updated on whenever we're doing new videos. And also watch for our videos at NycosRPG as I'm uploading select episodes from here onto that for our YouTube fans as well. So if you have any other questions or concerns, feel free to contact me either through the chat box, through YouTube, through our website. To actually purchase NycosRPG, current product available is the Dark Shard. That edition will be no longer in publication once the revision in the Dark Shard system book is completed. So that's coming up, but you can still get a hold of the enhanced edition, which has fundamentally all the things you'd need to be able to run a NycosRPG game session as well. So more information on all those places. Thank you for being here. We will see you in the next episode.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame. Our strength in numbers is a roll of the dice.